What's with that look? Get lost, you poor thing earning just $30,000 a year. That scary face? The envy of the poor is frightening. Right. Since we're at the government office, why don't you just get welfare, you bottom dweller? The ones I encountered at the government office where I had business were my ex-husband James Anderson and his wife Kate. The two of them together kept mocking me. Did they think I would cry and go home? I had no intention of giving in to them. Unfazed by their abusive words, I opened my mouth to speak to them. Thus, $30,000 is just my monthly income, though? What? Both of them raised their voices in disbelief at my words. $30,000 a year. That's not the James of the past. I laughed loudly and James, turning red, tried to argue back. The two of them continued to obsess over me. Finally, I gave them the punishment they deserved. My name is Diane Morris. I'm 50 years old. Currently, I'm a divorced woman running a cooking school. I married James Anderson, my ex-husband, when I was 26. We had a daughter, Stacy. We were just an ordinary family. James was a company employee who worked earnestly every day, but was short-tempered and prone to anger. He held male-dominant beliefs and sometimes made disparaging remarks towards me and Stacy. However, on the positive side, he strongly felt he needed to be responsible because he was a man. In the beginning of our marriage, I saw James's manliness and reliability, and our family lived modestly but happily. I met James through a common introduction at work. Even after turning 25, I never talked about having a boyfriend. So my senior at work was worried about me. Honestly, I wasn't very attracted to the idea of marriage. I preferred working over getting married. But not many people thought like me back then. Many believed that retirement upon marriage was a woman's happiness. Moreover, my parents too started pressuring me about marriage every time they contacted me. Being away from home for work and wanting to reassure my parents, I wondered if it was better to get married. Meeting James at that time, I began to see him as a potential marriage partner. It seemed he had similar concerns. Everyone around me is getting married and my parents are nagging about it. Honestly, I'm not interested in marriage. But if I were to marry, I'd like it to be with someone like you, Diane. One day, James told me this. Although we weren't deeply in love, I thought we could be good partners for each other, sharing similar views on marriage. So, we decided to get married within a year of meeting, but we really had no money. Both of us had been living alone before marriage, so we had almost no savings. Thus, our wedding was just a small meal with only close family. We couldn't afford a new house, so our married life began in the apartment I was living in. Because of our financial situation, I planned to continue working after marriage. James had agreed to this before, but once we were married, he started having issues with it. It was sometime after our marriage. So when are you going to quit your job? Those words were like a bolt out of the blue. I replied, looking baffled. What? I plan to keep working. I told you that. James mumbled his dissatisfaction at my words. But if you work, won't people think my earnings are inadequate? Everyone usually retires upon marriage. You should too. It was such a complete reversal from our pre-marriage discussions that I wanted to ask what those talks had been for. Suddenly hearing James say that, I opened my mouth, mixing in a bit of anger. Why? We both know we're short on money, right? And you agreed to me continuing my work. But my boss and manager think you've already quit. I can't tell them you're still working. I was astonished. It was just a pretense. James had told his superiors I had quit my job. Nowadays, it's not unusual for both spouses to work. But back then, it wasn't as easy for women to work as it is now. Pressured by his surroundings, James started insisting that it was ridiculous for me to work and pushed for my resignation. He even got his parents involved, and the entire family opposed me working. You'll have kids soon, and it's cruel to leave them in daycare while you work. Just quit your job. James wants you to, right? It's best for a woman to take care of the home. Despite living far away, my mother-in-law irresponsibly threw such words at me. I couldn't agree with quitting my job, but being cornered by everyone, I eventually had no choice but to stay at home. However, that didn't increase James's salary. Our reduced income directly impacted our lives. All I could do was cut back on living expenses. Because we had to live on just James's salary, we were thorough in our efforts to economize. Is this all for dinner? Before payday, there were times when James made a strained smile at our modest meals. Can't help it. We're out of money for the month. But I'm working. I'm eating for both of you. I have to work for your share too. Sometimes he would say this and snatch my portion of the meal. Moreover, he would take pocket money from the living expenses, claiming it's embarrassing to be seen as having no money outside. I couldn't discuss such a humiliating situation with anyone, since James didn't want anyone to know we were short on money. I could even borrow from my parents. Of course, I had no money to spend on my cosmetics or clothes. Despite the situation, James wouldn't let me work, adding to my stress. When I was considering divorce, James noticed and said, "If we have a child, you won't need to think about unnecessary things." He suggested having a child despite our financial difficulties. I knew our finances would be a disaster if I got pregnant in such a situation. I opposed it, saying it was too early, but I eventually got pregnant, making it difficult to divorce or start working. However, I found our daughter Stacy very adorable. Fortunately, she grew up healthy without any major illnesses. As James got older, his salary increased slightly. It was still below average, but we got used to saving money. Being a full-time housewife, I could attend all of Stacy's kindergarten and school events. We had endured and sacrificed a lot to reach this point, but we finally managed to live a normal life. Then one day, James said something unexpected. "Maybe you should start working too. Staying cooped up at home all the time will age you fast." I was lost for words at James's casual remark. "What do you mean? You said it was shameful to work when we were struggling with money, and now you tell me to work?" James looked annoyed at my spontaneous response. "What's the matter? Don't want to work? Being a housewife is just laziness." I was shocked by his harsh words. It's not that I didn't want to work. I just couldn't stand his attitude and words. The wife of the new chief who recently transferred works even after getting married and having kids. "She always looks great, but you, Diane, don't you feel pathetic?" What kind of face was he making while saying that? Had he forgotten what he told me before? I had a lot to say, but I held back because Stacy was nearby. I'll find some work." I told James this with bitterness in my voice. He seemed smug, as if he had won. And so I started a part-time job nearby as a cook at a supermarket. At that time, Stacy was in the upper grades of elementary school. She was still a child and needed supervision. I couldn't leave her alone, and I had household chores to do. Adding a job to that, I was exhausted every day at first. James didn't change, even after seeing my state. "Tired from just a part-time job? Learn from me." He would say this arrogantly every day. Working full-time and balancing work with household chores and childcare are completely different. I used to work full-time and remember not being this tired when I only had to take care of myself. It's just part-time, but I also have household chores. Can you help a little? Even just checking Stacy's homework would be a big help. I asked James for help, but he refused to cooperate. Homework? That's not just a mother's job. Then at least help with washing the dishes. You want me to do housework when I'm tired from work? Housework is not just a woman's job. Whenever I asked for help, he would push everything onto me, using being a mother or a woman as excuses. I gave up expecting anything from James due to his selfish behavior. Then, a few years after I started working, Stacy got sick. We didn't know the cause initially and visited several hospitals. Of course, I took time off from my part-time job to focus on Stacy. But James's reaction was indifferent. "She's probably faking sickness to avoid school. Don't skip work. Our income will decrease." He showed no concern for Stacy, who looked unwell and just drank beer. Eventually, Stacy's illness turned out to be non-life-threatening, but she needed regular hospital visits. I had to take a lot of time off from my part-time job. Unable to continue inconveniencing my workplace, I had to resign. James was furious about this and started berating me. "You can't even keep a part-time job for 3 years. I feel bad about resigning, but it couldn't be helped." Couldn't be helped? You just wanted to go back to being a comfortable housewife, didn't you? No matter how much I explained Stacy's condition and our situation, James was not sympathetic. Instead, he kept pressuring me to work, struggling with not being able to balance everything. Struggling with not being able to work and James's verbal abuse, I felt defeated. Then one day Stacy said something. "Mom, I'm sorry you had to quit your job because of me." I was shocked. I knew Stacy had heard James's words, but I didn't realize she felt this way. Filled with regret and resolve, I knew I had to prove it wasn't Stacy's fault. "It's not your fault, Stacy, but I'm happy you're home. I want you to stay home like before." "Stacy," I thought about it. And what came to mind was working from home. However, there weren't many things I could do. After some thought, I decided to start a cooking class at home. I had always been confident in my cooking skills. With my experience living alone and working as a cook at the supermarket, I had a decent repertoire of recipes. Moreover, thanks to my 3 years working at the supermarket, I had managed to obtain a cooking license. Thus, I was able to smoothly start my cooking classes. Stacy was very happy about it. But James just ridiculed me. "You think you can succeed on your own? Who would want to pay to learn your cooking? Stop struggling and go find a real job, shut in." James grumbled and complained while I was preparing for the classes. Still, I didn't give up. I thought if it went well, even James would change his mind. But things didn't go smoothly from the start. I struggled to find students. Even when people came for trial lessons, they rarely turned into repeat customers. This situation played right into James's hands. As expected, he continued to mock me. "Go get a proper job." He said it so easily, but considering Stacy's hospital visits and her sudden illnesses, it wasn't that simple. James clearly had no intention of accompanying Stacy to the hospital, making it difficult for me to work outside. Despite my worries, I continued with the cooking classes. Then, after a while, I had a couple of students who attended every session. "Your cooking is popular with my family. My child hates vegetables, but they ate the dish you taught last time." They were such lovely people. Moreover, they started bringing friends, and about a year after opening, my cooking classes finally began to pick up. Stacy was very happy, but James still looked at me coldly. I could feel he still looked down on me, but he became increasingly silent. About 5 years passed. My cooking classes were doing well, albeit slowly. Stacy's illness also stabilized with her growth, and we only needed to visit the hospital for annual checkups. We weren't very wealthy, but we were living happily without any problems. Contrary to this, my relationship with James only grew colder. I felt his discontent with my success and had nothing more to say to him. I had thought we could be good partners when we married, but things don't always go as planned. Still, we were a couple that had been together for so long. I thought we would continue our relationship simply and quietly into our old age. That was until one day when high schooler Stacy returned home from school with a gloomy face. "What's wrong? Did something happen at school?" When I asked her, Stacy opened her mouth with a serious expression. "I saw Dad walking with a woman I don't know." "Your dad? Someone from work? What's wrong with that?" "No, they were arm in arm and looked close." I felt the blood drain from my head when I heard those words. I immediately knew it was an affair, but I wasn't shocked by the affair itself. I was pained by the thought that Stacy had been hurt by witnessing that scene. It might be a misunderstanding. I'll ask your dad about it. Okay? Sorry for bringing this up. No, thank you for telling me, even though it was hard. It's not your fault, so don't worry. I comforted Stacy with a smile, but I was seething inside. That night, sensing the mood, Stacy went to her room early. "Stacy's going to bed already?" "That's early." James said this casually. After watching him for a while, I brought up the main topic. "By the way, Stacy said she saw you walking with another woman." "Me with a woman? Must be a misunderstanding." James responded with a faint smile, but I didn't miss the way his eyes darted away. "I'll forgive you. Just tell me the truth." I glared at him as I spoke. "The truth?" Well, James stuttered. But realizing he couldn't escape my gaze, he laughed defiantly. "Well, I'm popular, aren't I? Maybe something like that happened." "Don't talk nonsense. Stacy was hurt by that, you know. What are you thinking?" "What? I've always been nagged about money. And you turned the house into a cooking class or whatever. There's no place or comfort for me in this house. What's wrong with seeking comfort outside? I was speechless at his words. Sure, I might have inconvenienced him by running classes at home, but James and the students had never run into each other. Even after the classes, he would mock, "No one came today? Not very popular, huh? I was busy cleaning up." But it was unfair to blame the discomfort of the house on the cooking classes. Besides, our money problems didn't start recently, and were partly his fault. Yet he used that as an excuse to cheat and hurt Stacy, which was unforgivable. However, my cooking classes alone weren't enough to support Stacy and me. Knowing this, James said confidently, "If you're unhappy, I'll divorce you. I've been continuing this marriage out of pity for you. But it's better for my happiness to divorce you and marry her." Wait, Stacy's school fees are coming up. Earn it with your cooking classes. If that's settled, let's divorce. Saying this, James actually brought divorce papers the next day. I was abandoned. But it wasn't just me. James also abandoned his own daughter, Stacy. I negotiated for child support and tuition. James reluctantly agreed, so I consented to the divorce. However, in the end, I never received those payments. And once again, I found myself facing tough financial days. Yet even as a single mother, I never lost my smile and continued to live. Supporting each other with Stacy, those days were a struggle, but our misfortune didn't last forever. Years after the divorce, my now adult daughter Stacy decided to get married. She lives far away from her job now. I went to the city office to get a marriage license form for her. That's when I heard a familiar voice. "Hey, isn't that the teacher?" A mocking tone. When I looked in response, sure enough, there was James. "Are you still running that cooking class?" His words, mixed with polite language, felt even more mocking. I abruptly turned away. Then the woman next to James laughed. "James, that's rude. She's your ex-wife, right?" "Yeah. Thanks to her divorcing me, I could marry Kate." I should be grateful. The woman next to him, called Kate, seemed to be the mistress Stacy saw back then. Unashamed, even though she got involved with a married man. The woman looking down on me alongside James seemed wealthy. Involuntarily, my gaze was drawn to the brand bag in her hand. Noticing this, James laughed even more mockingly. "Kate's parents own a company. You must be envious of this bag, right? Shh, something you could never afford in your lifetime." "I'm not envious at all. Pretending it doesn't bother you is useless. How much are you earning now?" "About $10,000 a year?" It seemed that James had become more arrogant knowing Kate was wealthy. "30,000. That's my income." I answered shortly. "Huh, $30,000. Not bad, but with an annual income of $30,000, you can't eat decent food, can you?" James kept loudly mocking me. I don't understand why he has to interfere so much. I glared at him sharply. What's with that look? A poor person with an annual income of $30,000 should get lost. That scary face, the envy of the poor, is frightening. Right, since we're at the government office, why don't you just get welfare? You bottom dweller? Kate joined in mocking me too. They probably thought I would cry and go home, but I was far from giving in. Unfazed by their verbal abuse, I opened my mouth to speak to them. "What? $30,000 is just my monthly income, though." "Dear, $30,000 a year, you thought?" I'm not like James of the past. I said loudly and laughed. As expected, James turned red and attacked me with his words. "What? Back then, you were always around $30,000 until we divorced. I really struggled marrying such a pretentious poor man." James, seemingly not expecting to be countered, was trembling and looked ridiculous. "Now you're lucky to be married to an old woman riding on her parents' coattails." "An old woman, you say?" Kate, too, seemed offended by my words and glared at me. "Yes, you're just a few years younger than me, right?" At that age, it's ridiculous to be pampered just because your parents are company presidents. "Do you even work?" Faced with my question, Kate fell silent. James had nothing to say either. It appeared that the two of them were living off Kate's parents' money without working. Realizing this, I couldn't help but laugh. Poor parents have to support an adult man and woman like you. "What did you say?" James almost raised his hand to me in anger, but he must have thought better of it. knowing what would happen in such a place. He reluctantly lowered his hand. A lying old hag like you shouldn't be meddling in other people's business. Oh, it's not a lie. Besides, you were the one who started meddling in other people's business first, right? How could a woman like you earn $30,000 a month? To that, I began talking with a smile on my lips. Doesn't Kate cook at all? Cooking? That's what the maids are for. Don't compare me with the poor. Our maid's pasta with truffle sauce is superb, and the vegetables are from our company. Kate laughed triumphantly at her words, but I only smiled more. Is that so? What's wrong with you? You're creepy. I'm glad you like the cooking I came up with. With those words from me, both of them were stunned. After divorcing James, I continued my cooking classes, but the classes alone weren't enough to live on. I was about to close the school, but then my students not wanting me to quit brought many people to try the classes. People called more people, and 3 months after the divorce, my cooking class became so popular that it was hard to get a reservation. I want more people to know about your cooking. Furthermore, a student who worked at a publishing house suggested I publish a cookbook. So, I first published a cookbook aimed at housewives. Thanks to them sharing their dishes on social media, the book sold incredibly well in this digital age. I also wrote a cookbook for toddlers, recalling the snacks I made with Stacy when she was in kindergarten, and another one with budget recipes from our tougher times. Recently, I even published a book with more upscale recipes covering various genres. Among them, the pasta dish using mushrooms and truffle salt became especially popular with various adaptations on social media. I'm sure Kate's maid saw it and decided to make it. It's not something a regular person could easily come up with. And I'm proud of that. You came up with it, I said. Yes, I'm delighted so many people are making it. Kate was speechless at my words. If she had made it herself, she might have recognized my name as the creator. But it seems she only bragged about having others make it for her, unaware that I was the one who created it. They both fell silent, probably realizing that my monthly income of $30,000 wasn't a lie. Well, I'm busy, so I'll be going, I said, leaving the deflated pair behind. I finished my business and left the city office. However, that evening another incident occurred. James came to visit my home. I had continued my cooking classes after our divorce and hadn't moved out of my apartment. Regretting not having moved when James showed up at my door, I went to greet him. Sorry about earlier. When I met James at the door, his smirking face gave me a bad feeling. What do you want? Well, I supported and helped you with the cooking classes, right? We didn't divide our assets during the divorce, and I think we should settle it now. And my bad feeling was confirmed. James had come aiming for my money. What are you talking about? I don't remember you supporting me. All I remember is being continuously mocked. Cooperation was the furthest thing from the truth. And what about dividing assets? Come on, you have money, right? We have to split it half and half since we didn't do it during our divorce. I held my head in frustration. Where did he get the idea that he was entitled to anything? It was incomprehensible. Right? Is Stacy here? She must have grown up by now. She probably wants to see me. James, still in a good mood, peered into the house. I blocked the entrance, closing the door slightly. Stacy isn't here. What? She lives far away. She's getting married soon. James's eyes lit up when he heard my words. Part of me wondered if he was happy for Stacy's happiness. But my thoughts were quickly betrayed. Who is she marrying? A rich guy. Well, yes, he's a hard worker. That's great. Stacy is like me, beautiful. So it's easy for her to marry into wealth. Women have the escape route of marriage. Lucky them. I suppressed the urge to slap him. I had hoped for the best, and been let down time and again. Expecting a father's reaction from James was foolish. He lacked even a shred of fatherly affection. What about the wedding? I should keep my schedule open. His words suggested he assumed he would be attending. I don't know. You should ask Stacy, but if you want to meet her fiancé, Chris, they're coming over this weekend. You could at least say hello then. James nodded happily at my suggestion. They had mentioned coming to pick up the marriage license and planned to have dinner. Leaving with that promise, James departed. I sighed as I watched him leave. Then on the weekend, James unexpectedly brought Kate to our house. Kate, a complete outsider. I let them in, not understanding why she came. Stacy and her fiancé Chris were already there and frowned at the sight of them. Why did Dad come? And who's she? It's been so long, and this is how you greet me. You're getting married, right? James cheerfully spoke to Stacy, but she looked at me wanting to say something. I grinned and addressed Chris. Chris, this is Stacy's father, my ex-husband James, and his current wife Kate. Hello. Stacy had told him about James and our divorce. It seemed Chris didn't have a good impression of them. Chris greeted them hesitantly. I continued speaking. You know, we didn't divide our assets when we divorced. Well, let's not talk about that today. No, it's the perfect time. Chris, you're a lawyer after all. And since Kate is here, I'd like to discuss things properly. Hearing this, Kate's eyes widened, and she looked at James, seeking help. Stacy seemed to understand the real reason why I invited James today, and smiled slightly. Compensation. I've heard the story. Based on the cases I've handled, in your situation, I think you could claim at least $10,000. Kate exclaimed loudly, panicking. It's no surprise. Being wealthy, but not working herself, she would have to ask her parents for the money. James, looking annoyed, said, just deduct it from the property division and give it to me. I couldn't help but burst out laughing at James's statement, still talking such nonsense. Chris also looked puzzled and said, property division? When you divorced, I heard Diane had no money at all. She didn't have it then, but she does now, Chris explained to James, looking exasperated. Property division is about assets accumulated during the marriage. Based on the divorce date, there was only about $3,000 in savings. So by simple calculation, $1,500 should be paid to Diane. What? I felt a bit relieved as things were going as I hoped. When we divorced, James took all the savings. Now, it doesn't make much difference, but back then, how much we could have used that money. I turned to Chris and said, I want it settled properly. Could you handle it for me? I formally requested Chris to intervene in front of the two. James and Kate looked at each other, turning pale. Later, we made a formal claim, but as usual, there was no payment. But I couldn't trouble Chris and Stacy any further. I decided to take the final step. I'm thinking of terminating the contract. I notified the fruit and vegetable company I had been working with. Since publishing my book, I had entrusted them with all the vegetables. The meal kits I created using vegetables from my recipes were also well received. They constituted a significant part of the company's revenue. And we had established a mutually beneficial contract. Deciding to end this contract now was indeed because of James and Kate. As expected, the company president and vice president soon came to see me. Was there any mishandling on our part? Your meal kits are still popular and we expect continued sales. Ending the contract now is both the president and vice president looked troubled, as they desperately pleaded for the continuation of our contract. I appreciate your company's help and am grateful, but I no longer wish to be involved. My firm words made them sweat as they searched for a reason. I revealed the answer like a verdict. Specifically, I don't want to be involved with Kate, the president's daughter, and the vice president's sister. Indeed, the fruit and vegetable company I contracted with was the family business of Kate, James's wife. Of course, I didn't know this initially. However, when Kate mentioned our company's vegetables and being the president's daughter, I suspected something. There aren't many fruit and vegetable companies around here. When I reviewed the contract, Kate's name was indeed on the company's excerpt. Kate, who doesn't work, was clear that she was just a nominal executive. I knew she was the vice president's sister and part of the family. And when I realized this fact, I agonized over how to deal with the situation. But, as usual, James and Kate were not sincere in their dealings with me. I thought it was unfair for me to be the only one upholding obligations. So I told the president and vice president the whole truth. I can't believe Kate's husband is your son. He did such an outrageous thing. Both were pale-faced and kept apologizing profusely. I'm sorry. We'll remove Kate from the board of directors. And Dad, you need to take responsibility for spoiling Kate. Yes, Miss Morris, I'm truly sorry for what my daughter has done. And so the president resigned. Kate's name was removed from the board of directors, and naturally her financial support was cut off. That Diane, who runs the cooking class here, is a terrible woman. Kate, who was upset, spent several days yelling outside my apartment building. Because of this, the entire incident was exposed on the internet. The fruit company was in a difficult position, but because of the vice president's character and his proper response, I decided to renew the contract with them. He kept apologizing to me, but thanks to him, I was able to receive the compensation payment. The subsequent fate of James and Kate goes without saying. The two, who had not been working, were left to a life of poverty. Both were abandoned by their family and ended up living in a small apartment. I learned about this when Stacy contacted me. My dad asked me to lend him money. Of course I refused. They had no one to turn to, and ended up asking their daughter for money, which is simply pitiful. He is now working in a day labor factory. He should have stayed at his job. He married her, thinking he would become rich, and got too carried away. Stacy said this and laughed heartily. Her laughter allowed me to laugh as well. I had always been angered by James, but now I feel relieved that he has fallen into his own hell. I know the pain of living without money. Now I want James to experience that hardship firsthand. I continue to work smoothly. Now, encouraged by Stacy, I even post recipe videos on a video sharing site. The joy of making people happy with my cooking is my greatest happiness. Stacy is expecting a baby soon. I'm thinking of writing a cookbook with delicious recipes for baby food next.